Thank you for joining us for our December Arkansas Valley Audubon Society program. I'm Megan Wilbar, Museum Coordinator for the InfoZone Museum at the Rawlings Library. If you joined us last month, you'll know our presenter, Zach Hutchinson, and our Arkansas Valley Audubon Society President, Dr. Peg Rooney. Although Zach isn't joining us live this evening, we do have his complete Raptor ID presentation. Zach Hutchinson is a community naturalist and the community science coordinator for Audubon Rockies, the Great Wyoming Bird Trail, and birding in Yellowstone National Park. Dr. Peg Rooney is joining me live this evening. She's the president of Arkansas Valley Audubon Society and the mastermind for the series of monthly programs. Her concern for the environment and the wildlife have been lifelong. Thank you, Peg, for your continued efforts to bring us great content, and I'll turn it over to you.
Great. Thanks, Megan. And I want to welcome you all here tonight and encourage you to take a stand for birds. The outgoing federal administration has decimated protections for birds, other wildlife, and their habitats. And so one of the ways in which we can fight this is by joining environmental organizations such as the Audubon Society. So you can join our local Arkansas Valley Audubon for $15 a year, or the National Audubon Society, which includes a local membership, for $30 a year. And membership information is available on our website, southerncoloradobirds.org, abbreviated SOCO, so socobirds.org. So I hope you'll join us in our fight to restore protections for wild places and for the wild things that live there. So I want to thank you, and now we'll get on with raptor identification.
Okay, let's get started. Raptor identification. Now, you may have seen the more fun title that we presented, in our public spaces. What the bleep is that? Raptor silhouette ID. And that is really one of the things we're going to cover tonight is what the bleep is that, right? Because we'll see that silhouette high in the sky, backlit by the sun, and you just want to pull your hair out, okay? We're going to go through that. Now, this presentation, it's not a cure-all for raptor identification, but it's going to start putting you in a better position to attempt your raptor identifications. And I'm going to give you some tools, some free tools also to help you with this process. And so in the chat box later, I'll be uploading a file that actually includes some silhouettes that I'll be using within the presentation as well. So lots of opportunities and lots of resources I'll be providing as well. So let's go ahead and get started. So first, I have to tell you who Audubon Rockies is, because Audubon Rockies is the one that, they're the organization that pays my salary to be here. So Audubon Rockies is actually a regional office of the National Audubon Society. And if you don't know who the National Audubon Society is, audubon.org tells you everything you could want to know. But in a very quick sense, Audubon's mission is to protect birds in the places they need today and tomorrow. So in a nutshell, that's what Audubon is. And so Audubon Rockies, we're the regional office serving Colorado, Wyoming, and Utah. So that's why I'm here, because Cheyenne High Plains Audubon is in our region. We're part of the Central Flyway, and so this slide just highlights what the Central Flyway is. So Audubon Rockies is part of the Central Flyway. There's a few other state and regional offices in the Central Flyway as well. And our head office is in Fort Collins, Colorado. However, I am in Central Wyoming. Casper, specifically. I'm in Casper. Audubon separates ourselves into flyways, because birds use specific flyways. Certain groups or niches of birds, they use very specific flyways. And so that's kind of how Audubon has organized ourselves. So if you didn't know that, this is a fun map that kind of shows a very generalized migratory pathways of some groups of birds. If you want to keep in touch, here's all the contact information you could ever want from me for Audubon Rockies. My email for Audubon Rockies. If you use social media, we have a Facebook page, Instagram, Twitter, and then our website is rockies.audubon.org. And if you're interested in our newsletter, it goes out monthly. You can sign up there. Many of you, when you registered, may have been asked if you wanted to sign up for that newsletter and if you wanted to sign up for a Cheyenne High Plains Audubon newsletter as well. And we'll talk more about that at the end. Real quick about me. So like I said, I'm the community science coordinator for Audubon Rockies. I'm a USGS permitted bander. So I banned everything from songbirds to raptors. I banded some shorebirds, hummingbirds. So I have a wide variety of experience with these birds up close and personal. And if you see this this little guy behind me here, I'll move out of the way. So that actually is a sharp-shinned hawk, a male that I caught this summer. So we'll obviously cover sharp-shinned hawks tonight as part of this. I do band owls, and normally this is my owl banding season, although between COVID and poor weather and a variety of other issues, owl banding is winding down to a close. So normally we're banding owls right now, and I would be out in the night banding owls. So today we're going to focus on diurnal raptors, so won't be a whole lot of owl talk. We're going to focus purely on diurnal raptors, okay? So the term raptor, what does it mean? What makes a bird a raptor? Now, it may bring up, you know, flashes of Jurassic Park, right? The Velociraptor, the Utah Raptor, etc. But in the simplest of terms, raptors capture their prey with their feet, okay? And so what makes a bird a raptor? It's a bird that captures its prey with its feet. Now, there's probably some birds that use their feet to capture their prey that are not what we think of as traditional raptors. And then there are birds that we call raptors that don't use their feet to capture their prey. For instance, a turkey vulture. Turkey vulture is not capturing a lot with those feet. I don't know if you've ever seen turkey vulture feet, but they are not what you would call menacing. I've had the pleasure, displeasure, whatever you want to call it, of catching some injured turkey vultures before being, vomited on as their defense mechanism. And their feet were not what I was worried about. An eagle, yes, I am very careful of an eagle's feet. Turkey vulture, if that turkey vulture grabs me, it's going to be painful, but not as bad as an eagle. However, that turkey vulture, what comes out the top end, that's what I was worried about, because that smell does not leave for a while. So what makes a bird a raptor? It's their feet. That's pretty much it. So what birds are raptors? Today, we're going to focus on the diurnal ones, but you can also include owls. You can go with, the accipiters, which are sharp-shinned hawks, Cooper's hawks, goshawks, the falcons, eagles, the buteos, and then I said, of course, turkey vultures, we include them, and then you have osprey and harriers as well, and then into the nocturnal. So for us here in Wyoming, because again, if you're joining us from out of our region, this is a little bit Wyoming focused since we're presenting tonight for Cheyenne High Plains Audubon. We're going to focus on the species that are most likely to occur in Wyoming. So accipiters, in Wyoming, we have 3 accipiter species: sharp-shinned hawk, Cooper's hawk, northern goshawk, okay? Falcons, we have 5 species. Eagles, we have 2 species. The buteos, we have 5 main species. And then turkey vultures, osprey, and northern harriers. And we're going to go deep dive into all of these as we continue on. As we go throughout this, remember, sitting too long at your computer can be hard on your eyes and your body, so make sure to stretch, because I'm going to need to stretch occasionally as well. Just a nice reminder, make sure you stretch like this beautiful peregrine falcon stretching its wings. So just a quick reminder, make sure you stretch as we go through the night. Okay, let's break it down. And breaking it down is this beautiful ferruginous hawk. So the accipiters, what is an accipiter? It is a hawk. Specifically, it is a woodland hunter, most typically. Now, you'll see them outside of woodlands, especially around feeders, but typically they are a woodland hunter hunting passerines, though there are exceptions. Cooper's hawks and goshawks eat a lot of squirrels and rabbits. So their diet varies depending on where they're located, but frequently we see them hunting songbirds or passerines, okay? Their shape overall, they have short rounded wings, and that's great because short rounded wings allow for quick bursts through tight spaces where they need to maneuver, because if you're chasing a songbird through the brush, you need to be able to maneuver to keep up and capture that songbird. So they're about that quick burst of attack. Okay, so short, compact, rounded wings. Lowers that chance of hitting a tree too, which if you've never seen a hawk hit a tree, I have. It's slightly humorous because it almost appears as if they're pouting when they do it. And that's anthropomorphizing a little bit. However, I've gotten to go out with some falconers before, and each raptor has a very distinct personality. Even just from a banding standpoint, where I only getting to see them for a few moments of their life, raptors have very distinct personalities, individual to individual. So, all right, so short rounded wings. Next thing, long tails. They have distinctly long tails compared to some other raptors. Okay, so when we talk accipiter, when you see a silhouette in the sky, short rounded wings, long tail, that's going to help you to narrow it down to the accipiters. Because again, that's what this is focused on, is helping you to narrow it down to ease your identification for these birds. So again, Wyoming, Colorado, Utah, our region, and actually everyone outside of our region as well, sharp-shinned hawk, Cooper's hawk, northern goshawk. Those are the three accipiters that are most common, with sharp-shinned and Coopers being most common. Northern goshawks are not as frequently seen, but are still present in our area. Falcons. So falcons, depending on what type of falcon, have a variety of prey that they prey upon. Everything, the kestrel hunts a lot of mice and grasshoppers, whereas a gerfalcon hunts everything from other large birds of prey to game birds such as grouse or small mammals. So it varies depending on which falcon we're talking about, but they're all built for one thing, and that's hunting with speed. So often they're found in open areas. Merlins can frequently be found in forested areas. There are types of merlins that prefer forested areas, but typically they're open space hunters using their speed to their advantage. And if you look at their wing shape, you might recognize that it seems similar to a jet, or maybe a jet seems similar to a falcon, right? Maybe humans pulled that shape from falcons because of their incredible ability for speed. And so that pointed, almost narrow wing type is very specific to falcons because it helps them with that speed, not only with just straight line flight speed, but also then when they, what is called a stoop, where they dive from the sky, they'll fold their wings and they come in like a missile and attack their prey that way, oftentimes using their feet to punch their prey out of the sky. But also then they have this very gnarly little hook in their bill that allows them to sever the spinal cord with a single bite. And it hurts. I have been bitten by them, and their bites are extremely painful. One went straight through my fingernail once. It was so painful. It was like the world's worst paper cut. So very lethal and very good hunters. And so you can see, now we're on the second slide, first accipiters, now falcons. Wing shape helps to determine the way they hunt. Okay, so you're going to see that as we go on. So think of that. What kind of bird is it? What kind of hunting is it doing? Is it ambushing like an accipiter, or is it, high above and then shooting through with great speed like a falcon? So consider behavior as part of your identification of your bird in question. So where we're at here, 5 species: American kestrel, merlin, peregrine falcon, prairie falcon are the most common. Gerfalcons are not common in Wyoming, Colorado, and Utah, but they do occur almost annually for our region. The past couple of years, there's been a regular gerfalcon that's been appearing in Fort Collins. Last year I had a gerfalcon in Wyoming. So they do occur. It's just they're not common. They come down from the Arctic, and we don't frequently get to see them. But if you do, they are impressive. Okay, eagles. So we've covered accipiters, falcons, now on to the eagles. Eagles can seem easy because there's only 2 species. However, the younger bald eagle and any age of the golden eagle can look very similar because immature bald eagles don't have the white head and tail. So it can be confusing if you're new to bird identification, or specifically raptor identification, okay? So let's cover them, and we're going to cover them from the bottom up, where we don't start with just the easy to view things. Let's focus on that shape, okay? So what do eagles do? There's a a zoo curator from the Southeast that he likes to refer to the bald eagle as a turkey vulture with a better PR agent. And that's somehow how it became our national symbol. Because eagles are oftentimes scavengers. They're just finding whatever food they can. And so his joke about the bald eagle being a turkey vulture with a better PR agent, it has some truth to it, because a lot of bald eagles are scavengers. Now, both eagles are capable hunters, with bald eagles oftentimes hunting fish, and golden eagles focusing on small to medium-sized mammals. But because they're both just looking for an easy meal at times, you'll see they are built for covering large distances with minimal effort. How do we know that? Look at the wings. They have large wing areas, meaning they're long and they're wide. Okay, and then with those great lengths, it just helps that they don't have to flap as frequently or as fast to get their speed up, because what they're looking for is that easy meal that they can just find as they're moving slowly through an area. Now, that's not to say they can't move fast, because they can. When they're hunting, they can absolutely move fast, but they like to cover large distances using minimal energy. And so that large wing area of eagles is fairly distinct. Now, you're going to see the buteos in a moment also have wider wings, but they're not quite as long as eagles. Okay, so when you're looking at a silhouette, if you're considering, is it an eagle, size is helpful, behavior is helpful, and then using that wing shape, is it broad and is it flat? Okay, they're oftentimes open space hunters, near water sources for the bald, or near open country for the golden or ridge lines. So consider all of these things when you see your bird in question. So the buteos, these are the ones that maybe after accipiters, these give some folks the biggest struggle from just a silhouette standpoint. So the buteos, again, you're talking a wide variety of hawks here, a variety of prey that they're going to eat. Everything from broad-winged hawks, which eat a large number of invertebrates. They eat a lot of dragonflies, to red-tailed hawks, which eat just about anything you could imagine. If a red-tailed hawk can catch it and kill it, it will eat it. So you have a large variety of prey that you're going to see throughout the buteos, and a wide variety of styles for hunting. But what you'll notice on all the buteos is that wide wing shape. Okay, they have just very broad wings, and there is a buteo called the broad-winged hawk, and yet you'll notice it's not really the broadest wings of the bunch. So, but overall, the buteos are the soaring hawks. Okay, so the accipiters were the woodland ambush hawks. The buteos are the soaring hawks typically. Again, that wing shape is built not necessarily for top speeds, but for searching. Okay, and within like the red-tailed hawk, you have a large variety of red-tailed hawks, some that are built for open country with those very big broad wings, and then some that are built for forest dwelling, where their wings are slightly more shaped like what you would expect from an accipiter, where they're built for short bursts, ambushing, maneuvering through trees. Okay, so with red-tails, it can differ a lot. However, in our area, we see mostly the open country subspecies of red-tailed hawks. If you go up to Sheridan in the wintertime gets a huge number of Harlan's hawks, which is just incredible. But that's not for tonight. So the 5 species most likely to be seen in our area: red-tailed hawk, Swainson's hawk, which is a summer resident. Most of them are out of the area or leaving right now. Ferruginous hawk, rough-legged hawk, which is a winter resident. So they're not here in the summer typically. We see them in winter. And then the broad-winged hawk, which is typically a migrant through the area, although there's some evidence that maybe there's some small breeding populations in parts of Wyoming, but no one has verified it yet. So if you're outside of our region, you're likely going to have some other hawks that we wouldn't see here. If you're down in the southwest part of the country or south central, you might have Harris's hawk or white-tailed hawk, etc. So if you're outside of our area, we're not covering those tonight because, again, this is a presentation specific for Cheyenne High Plains Audubon. So, okay, vultures. Vultures are one that often get confused with some of the buteos or eagles. Buteos are scavengers. And one cool thing about the turkey vulture, which is the vulture we have in our area, is they actually have a sense of smell. Most birds have little to no sense of smell. and that may be shocking to you if this is the first time you've ever heard it, but if you ever thought that a bird could smell you because you grabbed its chick and put it back in the nest, falsehood. Most birds can't smell. The turkey vulture can, however, and that's how they find their carcasses, is they're soaring, using the thermals to carry them, minimizing their energy output, finding carcasses by that really strong smell. Okay. Turkey vultures, again, very eagle shape in that they have the long, broad wings built for covering large areas with minimal energy output. Okay. You'll often hear people who've been birding a while, they'll refer to the turkey vulture as having the dihedral, and you can see there that dihedral shape. It's that kind of V shape. Okay. And you'll see it if they're coming at you. You see their wings have that kind of shape like that. And then also sometimes from below, you can kind of see it. And turkey vultures often look clumsy in the air when they're flying. They catch a thermal just wrong and they'll kind of adjust like that. If you're in a flight, it'd be a rough flight, it'd be a little turbulence. Whereas the buteos and eagles, maybe they don't experience that as often, but turkey vultures you often see are teetering and steadying back and forth. So look for those things. Turkey vultures, their silhouette from a distance, one helpful tip from telling them apart from an eagle is their bald head gives them the appearance of having no to a very small head. So if you see a silhouette and you can't tell, is that an eagle or is it a turkey vulture? If it appears to have no head whatsoever, you can start to lean towards turkey vulture because, again, the featherless head gives them the appearance of small-headedness. Okay, so use that. You might not be able to see that there's a featherless head, but if you're having a hard time seeing any head, use that as a feature to help narrow down your identification. The osprey. Most osprey are starting to leave our region. If you're in a part of the country where you have osprey year-round, lucky you. Consider me jealous. But the osprey, a fish feeder, usually found near bodies of water. Throughout our state, we have a lot of nesting platforms built specifically for osprey. They have a very awkward wing shape, and you can see in the silhouette, it's like there's a little kink in the area that you might call the wrist on this bird, right? You can see that awkward shape, almost looks like a gull. So from a distance, you might be like, oh, that almost looks like some sort of gull flying at me, but it's so large. So with osprey, that awkward wing shape, can be very helpful in narrowing down, what that silhouette is. Does it have that awkward wing shape? Now, word of caution, if a bird is trying to descend, they'll fold their wings up slightly and they'll have that kind of shape to them. So you also have to be cognizant of, is that bird actively flying, flapping, or is it trying to descend, coming towards the ground? Because when a bird is stooping or just trying to come in for a landing, they're trying to descend, lower their altitude, they're going to fold their wings up like that. So be careful of that. But that awkward wing shape, for the most part, fairly distinct for the osprey. Okay, when catching food, they're pretty unique in that their head and their feet are coming forward, full straight into the water, and they go all the way in. Whereas an eagle, you might see an eagle try to skim something off the top of the water. The osprey goes in, grabs it, and then has to get lift off of the water. And if you've never seen it, spend some time watching osprey, near some water and a nesting platform where they're having to carry food back and forth. It's an incredible sight to see an osprey catch a fish. Okay, so the northern harrier, very unusual and distinct bird. Their face actually looks very much like an owl, and recent research is showing that those facial discs that they have that gives them an almost owl-like appearance is actually used in a similar fashion to how owls use them. So if you see those cool facial discs, harriers are using them in a similar fashion, and it's really cool. So harriers, a variety of prey. From a distance, they're going to have that V shape and that dihedral. And now you're not going to confuse them with the turkey vulture because they're going to be behaving very differently. Harriers often are hunting close to the ground. And when they're hunting close to the ground, they're teetering. So if you got like this, they'll do this. Over grasslands, marshlands, very rarely are they interacting with any sort of forest land. Okay, almost always open country. So if you see that dihedral and that slow teetering, over the top of some open country that can help you in narrowing down your identification. You'll notice they have long, narrow wings and a long tail that when fanned out is a very large tail, okay? So look for those characteristics. If you're seeing that silhouette, what is this bird I'm seeing? Oftentimes a harrier is not going to be above you, but in front of you, right? It's going to be close to eye level for you because they're not hunting from very high. Now, that's not to say they won't, but we're just trying to, give some information to help narrow down some of these birds that we see that we're trying to identify. They have some easy to identify field marks, and we'll get into that as we break down each of these groups a little bit more. Okay. So, Northern Harrier male, you can see the long narrow wings, the long tail. You can see kind of those facial discs, but that big field mark I wanted to point out right there, that white rump patch, very distinct and contrasts very heavily on the Northern Harriers, male and female, adult and young. So that white rump patch can be very distinctive and very helpful. Now, certain buteos can give the impression of a white rump patch if you only see it briefly from the wrong angle. But if you've got a great view of that bird and it's doing that behavior with those long, narrow wings, and you see that white rump patch, you're fairly safe in calling that a Northern Harrier. You can see the sexual dimorphism between the male and the female. So the male was that gray color, whereas this female is that brownish color. The immatures as well. They have that brownish tone overall, but again, you can see that beautiful white rump patch. Okay, let's jump into the accipiters. The accipiters give people problems, so I'm going to give you some mnemonic devices to remember them, because we all need some tricks to help us identify these birds. Okay, so if it's not a silhouette, if it's just a bird that you can see, some things you can look for: sharp-shinned hawk. Sharp-shinned hawk starts with an S. So think of the S's. Number one, square tail. Sharp-shinned hawk has a squared tail. Now, what gives the impression of a squared tail is that the outer tail feathers, so if my hands are the tail feathers, the outer tail feathers, these fingers here, they're just as long as the inner tail feathers, so that when the tail is folded, it's the same length throughout. And on a Cooper's hawk, it's different. And I'll show you that in a moment. So squared tail, and I can point it out here on the screen. Take a look right here. Outer tail feathers, same length as the inner tail feathers. It holds up, okay? It holds up. Now, if a bird is molting their tail feathers, that can trip you up, okay? But for the most part, this is advice that holds true, so use it. Okay, next one, shrugged shoulders. And the shrugged shoulders is when they're in flight. It looks like they're hunching their shoulders up, and then their head does not project beyond their wings by much, okay? So it looks like they're doing this as they're flying. And I'll try to, I think I have an image coming up that will show that better, okay? But they have a shrugged shoulder appearance in flight. So sharp-shinned hawk starts with an S, square tail, shrugged shoulders, sooty tip. And that is the tip of their tail. If you look at the tip of this tail, see right here, and even right in there, it's not a crisp, bright white tip. It is sooty in color. And it may not be obvious right now, but when we see the Cooper's hawk in a moment, you're going to see that Cooper's hawk tail, and you're going to say, oh, that's white. Okay, that's not sooty. That's a white tail. This is a sooty tail. Okay, so sooty tip to the tail. And then in flight, they're very snappy. They have very snappy wing beats. What do I mean by snappy? Snap, snap, or snap, 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 glide. Snap, 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 glide. Quick burst wing beats. And because they're a shorter winged bird, they're smaller than a Cooper's hawk typically. It just, that appearance is just, they have very quick bursting wing beats. Cooper's hawk. So again, trick to remember. We're using the C's. S is for the sharp-shinned, C's for the Coopers. So curved tail. What does the curved tail look like? Let me draw for you here. Right there, that's the outer tail feather. Look at how much shorter it is than these inner tail feathers. It's a lot shorter. So if I use my hands as the diagram again, so remember, these are your outer tail feathers. So in the Cooper's hawk case, they're going to be shorter. Okay, so that when the tail folds together, you can see the graduation of the tail. But in flight, in flight, if they look shorter, it gives the tail a rounded appearance or curved appearance. So sharp-shinned hawk in flight, square tail. Cooper's hawk in flight, curved tail. And again, it's all because of the lengths of the outer tail feathers. Okay, the curved wing. So with the sharp-shinned hawk, the trailing edge of the wing, it has a very flat-like shape to it, whereas the Cooper's hawk has a slight curve to it. Now, sharp-shinned hawk can show that as well, so it's not a strong trait that I would say rely on solely. The tail is a very strong trait. The curved wing, not as much, but the sharp-shinned hawk generally has a very flat profile to the trailing edge of its wings. And the Cooper's hawks, they have a nice curve or fullness to that trailing edge of the wing. The crisp tail. So here's the white. Take a look at those distinct white tips on those tail feathers. It's not that kind of sooty gray. You can see these are clearly white tips. And now this tail on this particular photo, it's worn. The tips of this tail, they're very worn. So on a fresh tail, it's going to be even more noticeable. And again, it's a very strong trait. So this is one that you can use, you can rely on fairly heavily to help you, but make sure it's a distinct and crisp white tail. Okay. And then in their flapping, they're far more casual with the way they flap. Maybe it's a flat glide, then that sharpy, quick bursts. Okay. That snappy flight pattern that we see in sharp-shinned hawks. So the Cooper's more casual in how they fly. Like maybe they don't have to be there as fast as the sharp-shin does, right? So those are your C's. So 4 S's for the sharp-shin, 4 C's for the Coopers. Okay. Side by side, there's some other things we can utilize. With the sharp-shin, let me get out my annotation here. The sharp-shin, the back of the nape, it's nice and dark. You can see this dark area here on the nape, the back of the head area, whereas on the Coopers, it's pale. Okay, so that paleness on the Coopers kind of goes around onto the nape and throughout the nape, I should say, whereas on the sharp-shin, it's going to be dark. So there's a distinct line of contrast there. The eyes. So on Coopers, they have, if you look at this area right here, they have almost like a stern look, like they're glaring when they're just looking around. And the sharp-shin, they almost have a bug-eyed appearance because their eyes are so big for their head size, it almost makes them look like their eyes are like this, really bug-eyed and wide. Kind of like, you can see the one behind me. You see how the eyes almost look like they're sticking out of the side of the head? So sharp-shins have this very bug-eyed appearance, okay? And all of these things are things that hold true in the immature birds as well, okay? I'm using these adults because they make for better photos to show within a presentation, but the characteristics that I'm teaching you are characteristics that hold true as well. That bug-eyed appearance versus that stern appearance, still noticeable in immature birds. That tail, look at the tails now. You can see the very distinct sooty tail versus that crisp white tail. Oops, I drew over it. So these are things that will hold true as well in younger birds. So look for them. Look for that graduated tail on the Coopers versus that same length tail on the sharp-shin. There's some other little tricks that you can use as well, but then they get into a little bit more where it's slightly subjective. Some people like to use the toes. The sharp-shin have very narrow legs and toes. That's where they get the name sharp-shinned, right? They're narrow legs and toes. Whereas the Cooper's hawk, look at the toes on that Cooper's hawk. Whoo! Those are some hefty toes for killing larger prey. Okay, so some folks like to look at the toes. Now, obviously, if it's flying over, you're not going to get much of a glance at the toes. But the tail, the behavior, and the wing shape are very helpful when they're flying over, and you can only see a silhouette. Okay, here we go in flight. So these are from Sibley, and it kind of highlights the things that I told you about. So you can see the more rounded appearance to the trailing edge of the wing versus the flatter appearance of the trailing edge of the wing. Obviously, the tail's pointed out here by Sibley, but then also remember that that shrugged appearance I was mentioning. It's kind of that. You see how it's doing that? That's that kind of shrug, like they're shrugging their wings in flight versus the straight leading edge of the Coopers. Now, some people will look at projections, and I'm gonna show you what they mean. If they say the head projection, what does it mean? This is what it means. So if I were to draw a line from the top edge of the wing here to the other top edge of that wing, you can see the head does not project beyond the wings by much. Whereas on the Cooper's hawk, if I do the same thing, it projects a lot more. So if you ever hear a birder refer to the head projection on an accipiter, the head projection is talking about how far does the head project beyond the leading edge of the wings. And in the sharp shin, it's much less than it is in the Coopers. Okay, onward we go. Excuse me. Here is a photo of a sharp shin and a Cooper's. You can try you can cheat if you want by looking in the corners, or if you'd like to just take a moment to yourself to decide which is which. Look for that tail. These are birds in flight, so look for that tail. Look for the wings. Look for the tail. Look for the wings. If you want to use that head projection trick I just showed you, you can use that. I'll even help. I'll even draw that head projection. Let me draw this one. Let's see here. Oops. Oh, that line was, hold on. I did a bad job on that line. There we go. Okay, that one versus right here. So which head projection? And then look at the shape of the tails. What's the shape of this tail? What's the shape of this tail? Look for the white in the tail. Now, when they're backlit, you'll see this tail, it looks like it has very distinct white tips. But you also have to consider the light in this situation. One of these is backlit, the other one is not. So consider that as part of your process for identifying these, okay? But hopefully you've narrowed these down and determined that, yes, the bird on the left is the sharp-shinned, the bird on the right is the Cooper's hawk. At least that's how it is on my screen. Hopefully you see it the same way I do. Sharp-shinned is over here, Cooper's is over here, okay? And you can see in the bottom corners as well what they're identified as, okay? So use those tricks. And again, that wing one, like I said, it's not a perfect one, but you can see the trailing edge of the sharp-shinned wing is straight. Trailing edge of the Cooper's has that curve to it, okay? All pieces that you can use to identify. You don't want to rely on a single trait because it can betray you if you use it too often. So try to combine as many traits. Now, when a bird's flying over, you're like, oh, what was that? It's hard, right? It's so hard to just, oh, what are all the traits I'm seeing as this bird is shooting by me at, 50 miles per hour? But take as many traits off of that sighting as you can, as quickly as you can, and then use them to identify it. Okay. Continue on here. Oh, annotate. Uh-oh. There we go. Okay. Here is that eyed appearance. Remember I said the stern versus the bug-eyed? Look at the stern and look at the bug-eyed. So the bird on the left is the Cooper's hawk. It's got that eyebrow, that kind of, that really strong brow. It's that stern appearance, whereas the sharp shin has that bug-eyed appearance. Very surprised, like it's surprised to see you, like, whoa, it's a human. Whereas the Cooper's hawk is like, are you trying to stop me from eating at your feeders? So use those to help you identify. There's another little trick you can use, and this is a tough one if you have a bad angle. So I'm saying use this, when you're comfortable to use it and when it's appropriate. So on the Cooper's hawk, and we're spending a lot of time on accipiters because this is one of the hardest identifications. So if you feel like, oh, we're spending all this time on accipiters, it's because they're tough. So on the Coopers, you'll notice the eyes are even with the majority of the bill. The eye does not sit above the bill. Whereas on the sharp shin, okay, the bill is so much smaller that it appears like the tops of the eyes are above the bill. So a Cooper's looks like it's looking through the bill, whereas the sharp shin almost looks like it's looking above the bill. Again, it's somewhat subjective and, it's angle dependent, but you can use it. Again, add it to your list of things to use. Don't depend on it. Use it in addition to. Okay, we're not going to go deep into goshawks just because it's not a bird that's frequently seen, but if you see an adult goshawk, they're very distinct. They are this beautiful slate gray color mixed with this darker, so they're almost like blue in appearance when you see them, with this gray and this slate gray, and then these beautiful red eyes with this large white eye stripe. But the immature birds can be confused with Cooper's hawks, and so there's some things you want to look for when seeing them. And number one is just the overall appearance of goshawks. When I see a goshawk, what I say to myself is, did it look like a buteo that was shaped like an accipiter? Because that's what they appear like to me. They look like an oddly proportioned red-tailed hawk. They're so large and so impressive and so imposing that if it looks like a buteo with the shape of an accipiter, it helps me to narrow it down because they're just so imposing in their size. These are large enough to take down snowshoe hares and ruffed grouse and dusky grouse. Like, this is not a bird that is small or unable to handle large prey. So that's one of the first things I look for. And then one of the most distinct ways that you can identify them in flight, again with just a quick impression as they fly over, is the undertail coverts. And you'll notice Sibley doesn't point this out in his guide, but the undertail coverts, if they're marked, it's a goshawk. Cooper's hawks have unmarked undertail coverts. That is the white feathering underneath the tail, usually where the legs are folded. You can see on the goshawk there are markings. On the Cooper's hawk there are not. Okay, the white tips of the tails, it doesn't help a lot with the goshawk, but what does is that the lines, the wavy lines on the goshawk, so on the goshawk the lines are wavy, whereas on the Cooper's hawk they're straight. Now, if you can get that glance, it's very helpful. But if you can't, well, then obviously you're going to need to use something else, right? But if you can see that, use it, okay? Another thing, I got to move my bar out of the way here, is the top of the tail. See the lines through the top of the tail? On goshawks, they have a thin white outline to those tail markings, that tail bar. It has a thin white line outlining that dark markation. Cooper's hawks do not have that, okay? Another useful tip. But overall, the general, if you just look at the wing shapes now, Sibley points to fairly pointed wings, but that's very behavior specific. It can be helpful because the pointed wing appearance is because of how far the outer primaries, which are the outer flight feathers, what some people call the fingers, they project so much further beyond the rest of the wing, whereas in Cooper's hawks they don't. But that can be somewhat subjective, and in a brief moment it's hard. But just overall, just the general size, you can see the broad body, the very long and broad wings versus the less imposing body and wings of the Cooper's hawk. Okay, and again, if it's an adult, goshawks are very distinct, and as immature birds, they're a little bit tougher. But if it's so big, you're like, was that a hawk, like a red-tailed hawk, or was that an accipiter? It just, they have a nice, distinct, imposing feel to them. Okay, so here are two, and you can cheat if you'd like, but if you don't want to cheat, there are some distinct things that we can use here from these limited views. Okay, one thing I didn't mention in the flight was the eyebrow, and so let's look at the eyebrows. So goshawks have very distinct white eye supercilium right there. You can call it the eyebrows, the area above the eye. It's very distinct, broad, and white. Now, some Cooper's hawks can have it as well, but it's usually not quite as distinct, okay? But it's still very helpful. And then the back often is very buffy in goshawks and less buffy in Cooper's hawks. And then look at that tail. Remember the wavy lines? Look at those wavy lines, and then you can barely make out in this photo that isn't the greatest of quality. You can make out the white outline to those tail bars. Okay, whereas in the Cooper's hawk, nice straight tail bars with no white outline. Okay, and again, look at just the imposing size of that goshawk. If it didn't have that long tail, you might first go looking for a buteo to identify it because it's just so hulking in appearance. Okay. Another northern goshawk to compare. You can see wavy lines to the top of the tail, white outlines around those tail bars. And that eyebrow on this one, that supercilium, it's not as obvious in this goshawk on the left, but it's still somewhat present, somewhat there. Okay. All right, so let's jump into our falcons. Now, some falcons are pretty easy to tell apart from others, so we won't spend a lot of time because again, focus mostly on the accipiters, and I need to start getting towards the end here. So the peregrine falcon versus the prairie falcon, in flight, very distinct, easy way to tell them apart. If you are below them, it is all about the quote unquote the armpits. So in the peregrine, you can see it's a marked armpit, but it's just the same marking that carries throughout the wing and onto the body. Whereas in the prairie falcon, it's a dark armpit. The prairie falcon has that dark armpit, those dark auxiliaries, okay? So very distinct, those dark armpits in the prairie falcon. And other than that, you can try to, use the wing shape to help you identify, but if you can get a good enough look to see that, it's all you really need, okay? The prairie falcon almost has a more narrowed wing appearance to it, throughout the whole wing, not just the tip, but the whole wing. But again, that can be slightly subjective based on your angle and the bird. But if you can see that one field mark, pretty easy. You can also look at undertail coverts, whether they're marked or unmarked, that can be helpful as well. Here. Okay, so a couple images of that. You can see pretty easy to tell these two apart in these photos. Prairie falcon, dark armpits. Peregrine, light marked armpits. Okay, so prairie on the left, peregrine on the right. Okay, the merlin can present a bigger ID challenge. Merlins are a smaller falcon, and they can, in migration especially, if they're going over, if you only see them briefly, they can you can confuse them with, say, an American kestrel. The prairie subspecies of the merlin has a blue back that can appear similar in coloration to, say, the male American kestrel. So you just have to be careful with these, but generally their colorations are going to be quite different and distinct. So with these, though, what you want to look for, you want to look for the barring in the tail. So you can see in the kestrel, thin barring much more frequently moving up the tail or towards the body on the tail, whereas on the merlin, it's thicker barring and they're distinctly spaced versus those narrow bars that you're seeing on the kestrel, okay? The wing shapes, there's some small differences there, but again, then are you talking? There's a forest species of merlin that's very dark in coloration, but then the prairie merlin has this blue and kind of orangish coloration. So it depends on which merlin versus kestrel you're talking about. Okay, so here's that male American kestrel. You can see it's got the bluish wings, which, if you're only seeing a brief glance, can be confused with a merlin that has a bluish back, okay? But look at the tail barring. So on the male kestrel, tail barring, minimal. One single thick band there on the top versus the merlin, which has one distinct large tail band and then slightly smaller tail bands up the tail. So the female kestrel has lots of narrow bands, but the male, you can see, not anything there on the top. So comparing that with the merlin, you can see those distinct tail bands are helpful. Okay. Oops. Clear all of that. All right, so there's the female from above. So now you can see the tail banding differences between the male American kestrel and the female American kestrel. All right, let's get into the beautios. Let's move through these, because I know some folks probably are wanting to be off here soon. Don't forget to take a stretch. Okay, Swainson's hawk. While most of these are gone for the year, when they come back next year and you want to tell them apart in flight from the red-tailed hawk, very quick and easy way to do it. But if you're only looking at a silhouette, The silhouette of the Swainson's hawk is one that has narrow wings compared to a red tail. Especially in the prairie, red tails have very broad wings. Swainson's hawks have more narrow wings. And so Swainson's hawks, they have these dark trailing edges of the wings, and it's not just the trailing edge, but it carries up through much of the wing. You can see that entire back half of the wing is very dark compared to the red tail, that yes, it has that little bit of a dark trail, but then the rest of the wing, pretty average to light overall. The tail is an obvious one, but if you're looking at an immature red tail, they don't have red tails. So you need something else, and that's where that trailing edge of the wing comes in. Red tails also have these beautiful dark marcations right here that are very distinct. If you can see these on your Buteo in question, it is almost guaranteed going to be a red tail. Okay. There we go. Okay, ferruginous hawk compared to a red tail. Now, why am I comparing it to a red tail and the Swainson's to a red tail? Because if you see a hawk and you go, what was that? The majority of the time, guess what? It's going to be a red tail. Because red tails are just common. They're commonly found in all sorts of habitat types, and they're found near humans and where humans like to go. So a large percentage of the time, you're going to be seeing red tails. So I like to compare them all to red tails because telling things apart from a red tail can be one of the tougher challenges. So in the ferruginous hawk, if you're only seeing the silhouette, ferruginous have these massive wings. Not quite eagle size, but you can see they're still big and they're very broad. Okay. Now, if you can see field marks, what you'll notice on the ferruginous, you see that right there, that leading edge, no dark mark. Whereas on the red tail, they have it. Okay. Even immature red tails have this marcation. Next thing, the legs. So if it's not a dark morph ferruginous hawk, and we're not getting into dark morphs because that's a whole nother conversation. But the dark pants of the ferruginous are obvious even in flight, and they contrast heavily with the body and tail. Okay. And obviously the tails can be very light, very pale on ferruginous hawks. Another thing, silhouette wise, is the head. If you see a Buteo with a massive, just one big heck of a head on it, it's oftentimes going to be a ferruginous. Ferruginous just have very thick, broad heads compared to the red tail. So you can see that big triangular broad head versus that more narrow shaped head. Okay, so more of like this would be what, an equilateral triangle here versus kind of an isosceles triangle here, right? One has a more pointed appearance versus the other has that broad appearance. Okay, so the pants and the dark markings on the front of the wings. So the red-tailed hawk on the left, notice no red tail. You can't use it. Okay, immature bird. So let me, hold on. There we go. You can see the dark pants are not present on the red tail. However, even in flight, they are on the ferruginous. Then look right here on the patagium. So if you hear someone refer to these, they'll maybe call them patagial marks or the patagium. That's what they're referring to. It's that leading edge of the wing. And so in the red tail, it's dark, it's obvious, it contrasts. Again, when we're not talking dark morphs. In ferruginous, it's not as obvious. In immature red tails, they do have that barring throughout the tail, which is oftentimes what confuses people. And so, if you're looking at an immature red tail versus an adult ferruginous, pretty obvious there. And again, you can see that nice pale tail in the ferruginous. Those. Okay, so if you're in much of the northern states in North America right now, and our region specifically, Wyoming, Colorado, and Utah, the rough-legged hawks are back. They're coming in now in numbers. So as they start to come in, you're gonna have to start telling them apart from a red tail and a ferruginous. When comparing them silhouette-wise to a red tail, number one, they appear longer tail. They just appear like they have a longer tail than a red tail. And then they also appear to have long, narrow, tapered wings compared to the red tail. They can almost appear Harrier-like at first glance and by silhouette, but they're just not as narrow and long-tailed as the harrier, okay? But they can appear like that if you're only catching a glance or from a great distance. But compared to a red tail, longer-tailed, longer, narrow winged appearance than the red tail. If you can see field marks, so what I like to teach on the videos is where's the dark. So if you think about, if we go back, let me go back here. Where's the dark? Okay, so in the videos, where's the dark? In the Swainsons, it's in the back half of the wing. In the red tail, it's on the front, you could call it the shoulder of the wing, the leading edge of the wing. Okay, so where's the dark? Back half of the wing, front shoulder of the wing. In the ferruginous, where's the dark? It's the legs. Okay, the legs have that dark marcation to them that contrasts with the rest of the body. So where's the dark? It's in the legs on ferruginous. In rough-legged, where's the dark? It's out in the wrist. So they have these distinct, it almost looks like they're holding something. If they were to have hands, like they've got a handful of something dark in their hands. So in rough-legged, it's out near the wrist. The dark is near the wrist, where again, the dark in a red tail is up, closer to what we might refer to as the shoulders. So very distinct to see that. Now, this is a bird that I said it can confuse with the harriers in a field mark that I said is distinct to harriers, and it's that rump patch. So you see from the top side how the top of the tail is white. If you only catch a glance, it can confuse you for a harrier, but it's not the rump patch that's white on the rough-legged hawk. It's the upper part of the tail feathers. See, the rump is right here, and it's dark. So make sure you're noticing, is it the tail or is it the rump that's actually white? Because that can be a tricky thing, okay? If you're just seeing, a quick glimpse and you catch a sight of the tail, you'll notice rough leg have that very distinct tail pattern. And if you think back to that image of that red-tailed hawk, most red-tailed hawks aren't going to have, a number of distinct barrings up their tail. Immatures can and do. And so you have to consider, is it a bunch of bars going all the way up the tail, or is it that distinct thick bar, narrower bar? Okay, so thick bar, narrower. All right, so that distinct pattern, it's very typical of the rough-legged hawk and can be helpful in identification. Okay, and again, if you're only seeing the silhouette, longer tailed appearance, longer, narrow, tapered wing appearance. So here's a pair here. One thing that a lot of birders will point out, but it's hard to see unless you catch them sitting down like these two awesome photos, the pantaloons. Look at those things. Rough-legged hawks get their name from their feathered legs. So you see, they got the long pants on, they're ready for winter. Red-tailed hawk, they show off a little ankle, which in the 1700s, you wouldn't want to do that. You might be outcast from society for attempting something like that, but in the hawk world, it's okay for red tails to show off that ankle there. But no, in all seriousness, if you can see them sitting, if you can see the feathered leg, you're likely going for ferruginous. Also have it, but you're looking at rough-legged with that nice feathered leg all the way down. Whereas on the red tails, you don't. Now, if they're all kind of hunched up and they're really tight, kind of trying to shrink themselves down, it can appear like it's feathered all the way down. So you have to be careful of it, but it's a very strong ID tip. Another thing, actually, I'll go back to point this one out. The bill. Red-tailed hawks generally they have a very large, distinct bill. Rough-legged hawks, you can see, very small bill comparatively. So it's one thing you can use. You have to get a pretty good view of it to use it, but I did want to point it out because it can be helpful. So in flight, again, if there's barring on the tail, take note of the pattern of the barring, okay? So in immature red tails, you can see it's barring the whole length up the tail. Whereas in the rough-legged, thick, narrow, narrower, all right? 3 distinct bars, and again, varying in their widths, whereas these bars are closer in appearance the whole way up, okay? So take consideration of that. And at this angle, you can see using that trick about the feathered legs can be difficult because is that actually feathered all the way down, or do I just have a bad angle? It can be tricky. So you have to consider, you know, the angle you're seeing these at, because on this one, yeah, it looks fairly distinct. Yeah, yeah. Look at the feathers all the way down to those little toesies. Okay, so very distinct. And then look for that dark. Where's the dark? On the rough-legged, it's in the wrist. Red tail to the shoulder. All right, another view of them. Look at the bill sizes. The rough-leggeds often look to me like they have thicker necks, likely because they just have more feathering in that area. Almost looks like they're wearing their hood up, right? Because it's kind of a little bit thicker throughout the neck and head area, like they're cowled, like they have a cowl over their head or something. Okay, so that can be useful as well. Some people like to talk about the feet size, but unless you're getting a great view of the feet, you don't want to rely on that trait. Okay, eagles. So I said really the only complication with the eagles is when you're talking immature eagles. So immature eagles, quick ways to tell them apart. In the bald eagle, pretty much throughout its life cycle, it will always have more white somewhere on its body. So as a young bird in flight, look at the extensive white throughout the wing and the body. Whereas in the golden eagle, it's limited to the wrist and a little bit at the base of the tail. And then you think of adult bald eagles, well, of course, they have bright white heads, bright white tails, a lot more white, very distinct white. So throughout the life cycle of the bald eagle, it's almost always going to have a lot more white than a golden. And so in this case, especially in the armpits and across the belly, if you see white in the armpits and across the belly, it's a bald eagle. Okay, goldens rarely show any white in the rest of their body outside of their wrists and their tails. If you're only seeing a silhouette of both, then I like to focus on the head. Now you can use the wing shape and tail length. Goldens in flight from a distance appear like they have a longer tail than the bald. They also appear to have more narrow wings than the bald. But one thing you can really use to be helpful is that head size and that bill size. All right. Bald eagles have a schnoz. That bill of theirs is massive and it makes their head look massive. So from a distance, if you can clearly see that bird has a big head, it's probably a bald eagle. If you're like, whoa, bird's kind of got a small head and bill, likely a golden. So that head size and that bill size, very useful in identifying these two from a distance and from a silhouette standpoint. All right, so hopefully you all can see the bill and head size on these two birds. It's pretty obvious on that bald eagle, right? Which one's the bald? Look at the amount of white and look at the size of that schnoz. Look at that thing. It's very big. It's very distinct. Okay, so look for that. There's some other smaller details, but again, if you have these two great tips, you don't have to look for those other things. Okay, so look for that bill and head size and look for that white throughout the body.